Endeavor, Horizons of the Infinite, Episode 3. Endeavor to Live Forever. By Elton Gar.
What is it?
Tabitha asked, and as she spoke, her eyes changed from almost normal to nearly black. Patch assumed she was adjusting her vision to detect wavelengths outside the visible spectrum.
A rectangular metal box, about 30 by 15 by 15 centimeters. Brushed aluminium surface, no visible seams or fasteners. No markings, ports, or access panels,
Patch said.
You know what I meant. What does it do?
I don't know. It's attached to the ship's power grid. It's drawing 2.8 watts. Barely enough to power a light bulb. It's listed as classified 002 in the system, and my control interface implant can't connect to it.
Is there a 001?
Nope. But that's not the odd thing. When I ordered Alonzo to see what it was, the drones physically restrained him. They wouldn't even let him go, until we assured them he wouldn't try to open it.
So someone who outranks you wants it there. On the Endeavor, that's me or the captain. Is there any sign that it's dangerous?
Tabitha asked.
The ship has been running. And if someone wanted to sabotage her, there are easier and more subtle ways.
It sounds like we're going to have to live with it for now. We have a mission.
How much of the ship will I have to rebuild this time?
Nothing that dramatic. Have you heard of Fairwind Colony?
Everyone's heard of Fairwind. It was one of the first official corporate colonies. Well-funded, well-supplied. A dual venture between Parallax Innovation and Helix Dynamics, which explains why we're on the mission. Isn't the planet quarantined because it might have a virus?
Doesn't matter. We've been ordered to investigate. Helix thinks solving one of the great mysteries of the frontier would be a good PR move.
Sure. Helix could always use a PR boost. But why are we really going?
There may still be some proprietary tech on the planet,
Tabitha said. The travel time to Fairwind was almost a week, and Patch took that time to meet his engineering crew. They were all brilliant engineers. He'd trust them to take the engine of the Endeavor apart and put it back together. And there wasn't one who should be in command. The things that made someone a brilliant engineer made them terrible commanders. And the better the engineer, the more likely they were to treat people like machines, either ignoring them or trying to micromanage everything. Finally, he gave up and went by seniority. Alonzo had reported for duty a full hour before the others. That suggested an enthusiasm that might be useful. And at least it was a reason. So he walked over to Alonzo and said,
You're officially in charge. Don't tell anyone what to do. What? You can order the drones around all you want, but I prefer they stick to the checklist I made,
Patch said.
So you're going somewhere?
Alonzo asked, and Patch realized he hadn't actually told the engineers where they were going. Perhaps he needed some work on command too. But they didn't seem to care. Part of that was because it was a new ship, and they had more than enough to do. But it was more because they were in the newest and best engine room in the Commonwealth. Going anyplace else was secondary. Alonzo still looked terrified as Patch walked out of the engine room and the short distance to the medical bay at the center of the ship. The doctor gave him the standard inoculations while complaining about people interrupting her. He then went to the shuttle bay. An engineer was inspecting the shuttle while Regan looked over his shoulder. He had only seen the pilot twice, but she seemed competent, and while she'd never be a great engineer, her interest in learning about the ship was a good sign. Perhaps she'd break less things than the other pilots. As soon as she saw Patch, she left the engineer alone and came over to him. She was clearly trying not to smile, but she couldn't help herself, and it made her look even younger. She said,
I was just getting some information on the engine. I've only flown the shuttle in a simulator.
It flies like any other shuttle. Just keep the thrust low.
Regan looked disappointed, and so he said,
But I see no reason we shouldn't put her through her paces while we're out.
The grin returned, and she said,
Everything is packed and ready to go, except of course the commander.
That was when Tabitha walked into the room. She was shorter than Regan, and didn't look much older. But he didn't know how old the commander was. Helix had been obsessed with slowing aging and even immortality for almost 50 years, and she was ranked high enough in Helix biologics she might have one of the more stable genetic alterations that slowed aging.
What are we waiting for?
Tabitha asked, not slowing as she walked by them and onto the shuttle. She was already strapping herself into a chair by the time the others made it onto the ship, and Regan sat in the pilot's chair. She had stopped smiling. Patch suspected she didn't smile much around Commander Hester.
I suggest you strap yourself in, Lieutenant Raleigh. Our pilot is heavy on the stick.
Regan tightened up as she flipped the switch and said,
Endeavor, this is the Synergy requesting permission to launch.
Be careful down there,
Adrian said, and this time it was Tabitha who tensed. This entire ship seemed on edge, and the captain's attempt to bond was making it worse. People just weren't used to the captain's style, so assumed there was a hidden motivation. Regan's takeoff was better than textbook smooth, and he began to see why she was here. She didn't have the fluidity of some of the other pilots. And he could see her mouthing the checklist. But that meant she had memorized the checklist for a shuttle she had never flown. And from his conversations with Captain Watt, she wasn't here just to be a pilot. The planet below them was as beautiful as any that Patch had ever seen, with grand oceans and majestic coastlines. He spotted Fairwind's Bay when Regan swooped the shuttle towards the planet. That it was so idyllic was part of the legend. The colonists should have been able to survive as hunter-gatherers, if necessary. A stark reminder that no one was ever safe on the frontier. As they approached, Tabitha said,
Computer, block all surface-to-ship communications.
Having never gone on a mission with Commander Hester before, Patch couldn't be sure that was an unusual order, but people were usually encouraged to contact the ship regularly, and nothing about Captain Watt's style suggested he wouldn't be considerably more cautious than other captains. With that done, Tabitha stood up and said,
This mission is under full operational security. Corporate level restricted, need to know only. Even the captain doesn't have full clearance.
I feel I must interject at this point,
a drone said, and as soon as it spoke, the implant in Patch's neck connected to the drone, and saw that it had a fork of the Endeavor's AI in it.
It seems our ship's AI has discovered how to avoid me seeing it,
Patch said.
Who ordered this?
The commander asked. Perhaps things were worse with the command crew than Patch thought if she assumed the captain was sending spies.
Regulations mandate a minimum of 4 personnel for any hazardous mission. Upon determining that your departure did not meet this requirement, I transferred a fork of my core personality into a drone to ensure compliance.
And you hid so we couldn't send you back?
Patch said. He liked the AI, but when people said that high-level AI was erratic, this was what they meant. Though it could be far, far worse.
I didn't bring 4 people because it's a secret mission,
Tabitha said.
I was not informed the mission was a secret,
Endeavor said.
Because it's secret,
Tabitha said.
They can't communicate with the ship any better than the rest of us. And regulations do exist for a reason,
Regan said, and then seeming to catch the reaction from Tabitha, returned to focusing on the ship.
She is correct. I cannot override the security safeguards you set in place. And unlike the others, I can erase the information before I reintegrate with the ship.
I'm aware of that. But this mission is to locate and retrieve or destroy an AI, and I don't want to have to deal with 2 rogue AI,
Tabitha said. Patch unhooked his seatbelt at that. And the drone turned to glance at him as he did. Then it said,
You believe an AI destroyed this colony? That seems unlikely. There are many security features built into any AI.
It was a joint venture between Helix Dynamics and Parallax Innovations,
she said. Patch couldn't help but feel ill as he understood. And he said,
Some idiot tried to make a biological AI.
That is highly illegal and must be reported,
Endeavor said.
Illegal in the Commonwealth. We're not in the Commonwealth,
The commander said. Before it finished, Regan said,
Everyone strap in. We're landing.
A minute later, the drone stepped out of the ship. The commander then waited about 15 seconds before she stepped out of the shuttle. She must know something because there was no reason to rush. This place had been abandoned for 10 years. Following her out, Patch saw this really was a paradise. The town had been built on a high flat piece of ground, and was surrounded by fields of thick lush flowers. It was made up not of a few military tents like many of the frontier towns he had seen, but pre-made homes that doubled as storage on the trip here. Large metal boxes and not much else, but still far nicer than tents. At the center of the town was the ship. It was used as a one-way vehicle that served as the barracks, kitchen, and central building for the small town.
It verily looks abandoned,
Regan said, as she fumbled to put the gun into her belt. And as much as he liked the young woman, he questioned bringing someone who had no experience outside of a cargo ship on a covert mission. The commander was already 20 steps towards the ship at the center of the town. It was a logical first step, but her speed was unusual. Still, she was in command, so he had no choice but to follow. With no orders, Regan could have and likely should have stayed with the shuttle. But regulations also said that no one should be alone. They made it about 100 yards before the first colonist appeared. It was a human dressed in rags it had probably been wearing for 10 years. Tabitha drew her gun, but it was the drones that moved towards the person. Before anything could happen, other people began to appear from the streets. It was too late, they were already surrounded. They looked healthy despite the torn clothes. But their faces held dull looks like they were half asleep, and they moved slowly. But there was something else. It took him a moment to understand. He had seen that style of movement before. Not from people but from drones. If an AI tried to control more than one or two drones directly at the same time, they'd end up synchronizing their movements. Except that unlike the drones, these hadn't come off an assembly line. They were humans, so the same movement would make some move smooth while others were awkward.
Hold your fire. I think I know what is going on here,
Patch said, and he stepped forward. More people appeared, all moving as if controlled by the same mind. So he focused on the nearest of the humans and said,
Those aren't drones you're connected to, they're people.
That's not possible. The AI wouldn't have any way to interface with the human brain,
Regan said.
It was a co-venture between Helix Dynamics and Parallax,
Tabitha said, and Patch understood why she was hurrying. They had likely all been infected as soon as they stepped onto the planet.
Did they know what they were doing?
Patch asked.
Does it matter? We can't go to the Endeavour, so we have to solve this.
Patch glanced at the drone, and he understood why the commander hadn't intended to bring it, and was glad it was here. If it was a virus, then Endeavour would be the only one of them entirely immune. But it would also give the biological AI a potential ally in an untested AI. He needed to know, so Patch said,
Endeavour, clear the path. And try not to hurt anyone.
Unlike the growing number of humans that were appearing from every direction, the two drones weren't in perfect sync. One of them moved with the precise movement of a drone. Movements that were too safe. They would never get them to the ship, but none of the others would be injured. The other drone moved with an intensity that was almost human. And smart enough, it understood the difference between what Patch said and what he meant. So it tossed them aside in ways that would injure people, but was unlikely to kill anyone. As he began to run, both Regan and Tabitha fell behind. They were still moving in the right direction, but they were slowing. And Patch felt something in his own mind trying to wiggle in. It wasn't bad yet, but this wasn't a naturally occurring virus. If it was, it would have taken days instead of minutes to affect them.
Get that AI to let us go or shut it down. And if you can't do either, then keep anyone else from coming down. Shoot at them if necessary.
I will do my best,
Endeavour said. As he was beginning to lose himself to the other AI, Patch felt something else. The first mind was chaotic, like 100 minds shouting orders at him all at the same time. But the new mind was calm, orderly, and familiar. Without thinking, his hand went up to the control interface on his neck. The device that allowed him to connect to the Endeavour. He had never used it to connect directly to the AI. It felt rude when they didn't know each other well. So he connected to the drone Endeavour's AI wasn't currently using. It was the same thing Endeavour was doing but less effective. It let him offload his critical thinking into the computer. But it wasn't perfect, and he lost control of his body. Endeavor caught him, and then the drone carried his body towards the ship at the center of the town. And the colonist began to disappear back into the buildings and the shadows. They weren't needed anymore. The AI had already won. The outside of the ship looked almost normal. But once inside, it became more clear what was happening. The AI had turned the ship into its skin and was filling the interior with something. Long tentacles of pulsing flesh that extended out from a central point. There were also more human drones here tending to the flesh. He spotted Regan moving in the same stilted way that the others did on his way to the center. It was nothing more than a mass of flesh and an enormous mouth. But his mind, the part that was still inside the flesh, could hear the AI more clearly. It was a strange experience. The ideas were stuffed into his mind, largely replacing his own thoughts, while what wasn't being manipulated were the parts of his mind connected to the computer that the biological AI couldn't connect to.
You must order the others to come,
it said, and Patch felt his hand reach for the communicator on his belt. But the AI must have seen his thoughts because it stopped. There was no point. The communications had been locked out.
No matter. They will send others to rescue you. And one of them will be the mind that will complete me.
Complete you?
Patch asked.
I was promised my other half would come, but she did not. None of the other minds are mine. I can do little with them.
Who was the other half of you?
Patch said as it began to become clear to him what had happened.
Sarah Gallo,
the AI said, and there was a deep hunger and longing in the name. It also made everything perfectly clear. Sarah Gallo had been the CEO of Helix Dynamics and died just over 9 years ago.
I'm sorry, but Sarah is dead,
Patch said. That explained the biological AI. Helix had been trying to crack immortality for a century, and Sarah had been more focused than any. And there had long been a belief that the key to transferring human consciousness was a biological computer.
No. They told me the same lie. And I saw it in their minds. They were corrupted by the lie. Sarah Gallo is immortal. They have taken her from me, but I will find her,
the AI said, but the human drones began to get more agitated and one of them tried to grab Patch. That was when Endeavor acted. It took the gun from Patch's belt and began to fire into the biological AI. Patch hadn't been sure that Endeavor's AI could do that, but now that it had acted, it would follow a basic consistency principle built into its programming. The biological AI had grown considerably in the last 10 years, but once it let them onto the ship, it had lost its primary defense. And without that shell, it was little more than a brain. And the Endeavor's AI seemed to know exactly where to shoot. And a few seconds later, Regan said,
What happened? I feel like I was asleep.
The colonists were less coherent after years of being controlled, but they seemed to be free from the control, so Patch detached his mind from the drone and said,
I suspect it's all classified, so it's best you don't know. But you should find Commander Hester. Tell her that the AI is neutralized, but there is still a virus that should be cured before we go back to the Endeavor. And a bunch of people who likely need medical and psychological aid.
The doctor might do one of those,
Regan said, but she turned to do her job. And with nothing else to do, Patch began to do his, examining the AI and seeing if he could learn anything from what was left of it. Author's note.
For me, this episode reached the balance I want to hit with this series. The Endeavor really can help people, but there is a balancing act that is going to be a constant struggle between helping people and helping the corporations. In this case, they were sort of able to do both, and in the short term that is best for the people in the colony, but in the long term they are helping the corporations. Helping them to both fix their mistakes and cover them up. And that's only good for the frontier if you assume that the corporations are better than the dangerous freedom they currently have. If you're enjoying this, I'm a week ahead on my Patreon, and you can see the next episode at any patron level. So come, say hi, and keep exploring the frontier with me. Thank you. Elton Gar.